Santonya Fair JD is a visionary, strategist, and philanthropy enthusiast. Satonya brings more than 25 years of experience working in corporate community relations, private philanthropy, and nonprofit management. Her extensive knowledge on the funder landscape, nonprofit structures, compliance, change management, philanthropy technology, outcome measurement, and knowledge management have allowed her to navigate and support strategic efforts across many fronts. She is dedicated to helping create equity and parity between funders and nonprofits, particularly those whose work supports communities of color, children, and families. Satonya thrives when managing large-scale initiatives, helping reframe procedural norms and aligning organizations around innovative best practices. And you need to know that her organization serves over 6,000 grant makers from around the United States. Satonya is focused on the people who do the work and believes that prioritizing people over projects not only produces a better culture for optimum performance, but it creates better continuity and sustainability in the process. There has been a thread of work focused on race, equity, and inclusion, and Satonya has led and contributed to a myriad of initiatives in this area. Satonya has a JD from the University of Cincinnati, and her bachelor's degree is psychology and political science from Miami University in Ohio. She is an avid volunteer and makes her home in Catonsville, Maryland, and that makes 3 Baltimore girls on the call today. So, without further ado, I bring to you Santonya Fair. And Satonya, it's great to see you this morning.
It's wonderful to be here. Hello, good morning, everyone.
Yes. So Satonya shared that she didn't want to do a traditional keynote with cards and that kind of thing. And so what she and I are going to do is a community chat. And so not only are she and I going to talk, but I would ask that even now that you start thinking about questions that you want to ask her and put them in the chat. She is very, very interested in talking with you directly and answering your questions. So we'll get started talking about, because there's a lot to talk about and not a whole lot of time. But one of the things that Satonya and I talked about was the importance of this terminology called reframing philanthropy. And what that means to people who are involved in nonprofit operation, as well as the people who are served by it. And so, Satonya, let's talk a little bit more about this reframing philanthropy and how this is something that you envision actually empowers community leaders.
Well, I will just, again, thank you. Blessings to everyone. And this has just been such an interesting kind of set of circumstances. You and I connected about 4 or 5 months ago in prep for this and started preparing. Look at how much has just happened in that 5 months. Absolutely. So what I will say is that philanthropy is showing up every day, sometimes better than I like, and sometimes worse than I like. But the thing that I think is so important is that many people, I've worked in nonprofit sector, the foundation sector, but it's all nonprofits, like the IRS considers all of us nonprofits. And I have found it really important as I've worked in community, which is such a huge part of what I do every day. So like there's the work and then there's the passion, right? When I'm in community, like I am with you all today, and as a nonprofit myself, right? We work with foundations. We're a nonprofit. We're great fundraising, trying to keep my team okay, trying to do all the things every day, just like everyone on this call. And so please, the whole point of the reframing is that it's one system. There is no them, there is no us, right? Because there's just a classification that gets thrown out right at us. But I always think about the fact that so many folks in nonprofit who bring an idea and great passion and start the organization are often not thinking about themselves as philanthropists. So that is really big. I say to people all the time, do you go to church? Have you ever written a check or put some money in the plate? I know I do. Give out clothes, write a check to your favorite nonprofit, pool money with the family to get somebody through their first year of school, the susu, we could go on and on. Like at the end of the day, we're all philanthropists. And it is so important for how we as nonprofit leaders show up in the space when we have that opportunity to begin to connect with our regional community organizations. Almost every community has a regional association. Here in Baltimore, it's Maryland Philanthropy Network. And we have a Baltimore Community Foundation and the Greater Washington Community Foundation. These are often the first points of contact with like traditional philanthropy. And then there are like family philanthropies, corporate organizations in your backyard. There's always, you look around, you're like, what company's here? Well, if there's a company there, they're giving away money. Just remember that. And most of them, I mean, some of them are more established, some less established, some have rules, some have no rules because the IRS doesn't make corporations abide by the same rules in corporate giving. And so, because they're there to make a profit. So they can butter you up as a customer to hopefully also by donating to your local favorite charity. That's what they do. Customer, charity, they put it together. But that's what they do. And I use charity only in the perspective of talking about corporations. After that, that term has got to go. But I do think it's so important for us to think about, we are important in this ecosystem. We're important because you can have all the money in the world. Philanthropists, traditional explanation, they can't do anything with that money unless we, the doers, receive it and go out into community and do our thing. So when I am talking with foundations who are talking about grantees, talking about charitable organizations, I stop them and I say, here at Peak, we think about this as us being a nonprofit partner. You need us to do the work. We need you to do the work. That to me is two people equally needing each other. That is parity and that is partnership. And so there are those of us that are in the field. And just as I'm one person, but I have a whole group of people just like me who are kind of standing up to philanthropy and saying, with all of your money, you have got to do some things differently. But we are also coming into community and saying, hey, stand with your shoulders nice and proud. Nobody's better than anybody. You too are a philanthropist. So come in with your everyday understanding and knowledge of who you are in your community as a philanthropist, as a supporter of people, and stand shoulder to shoulder with folks, because I think it changes so much how we are in the room. And it also positions you better for conversation and not for this us or them or a receiver versus a giver. So that is one of the key pieces that I always think about in just starting with this reframing.
Yeah, and I think it is important, because even I hear sometimes in the community from people who may be on the corporate side that, these nonprofits, they're just always begging. And so sometimes it kind of puts, I think, community leaders, nonprofit leaders in this mindset that they're not on the same level. And I think it's an excellent point that really both sides need each other. And so I often share with clients, listen, do your research and find out where these pain points are for these corporations. All these businesses want people to know that they support the community.
Absolutely.
So it's a different conversation than walking in and saying, can you give me $1,000 versus walking in and be able to articulate, this is how we can benefit your company, because they want to see value in the money that they're giving.
Absolutely. And there's also just brass tacks, which is your title. I was a community relations manager. I don't have a job. if I'm not giving away money and meeting with community. And that's the other thing too, is that some people just don't like their jobs and they will show up in ways like you're always asking for money. And it's like, well, you could write me a big enough check so I don't have to come back. But that is the scarcity cycle that they have us all in, right? And so we do have to come in with abundance in our hearts and in our minds. But the key is that we shouldn't just come asking for the check. And we'll get to that. Because one of the things I love to do is just send an article to someone who gave us money or who I think in a year and a half, because I do a long game. And I've told my team, like, if the first time I meet, you know, Yolanda, and she's a funder, let's say she just hit the lottery and she made an announcement and said, I'm going to give half my money away. And we're coming to meet her. I'm not asking her for money. It's a long game. I'm going to say, it's nice to meet you, Yolanda. What's your intentions for giving away this money? Well, let me tell you what I do. Is there any, you know what? That's not what I do, but I know some organizations that do that. Can I create some connections? So even I have to slow my team down and say, we don't always go with an ask. Probably it's like ask and then 10 interactions where I'm sharing an article. I'm saying, did you see this news report? Here's a great story that we got back from someone in our community. So I am very purposeful because I also used to be a development officer back in the day. And so I think, and let me just give this, I started off making $0 helping kids in schools in over the Rhine, Cincinnati. That program was given $36,000, which included my salary and benefits. Wow. And I had to raise money for anything else I wanted to do with my kids. And so I had no idea what to do. I was just out of law school. I didn't know what I was doing. But somebody said, like, Fifth Third Bank is down the street. And like, they have like 5,000 employees and they can do book bag drives and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, so I got really savvy super quick about just walking up to anybody I thought was wealthy and just saying, I have these great programs that I do with my kids and we really need some support. I started off asking for things and eventually got comfortable asking for money, but it made a huge difference. And so I've been a fundraiser forever. And if I believe in something, I'm going to give it my money. That's just me personally. If it's $5 or $5,000, I'm going to figure it out. And so I have definitely like been someone who's had to be super scrappy about trying to raise the money, but it made me just realize very early on that it was about the relationships. And I knew that if every time the Fifth Third saw me and it was an ask, as opposed to look at what your money did or look at what we're doing, I knew that that would be a problem. And so I'm just encouraging everyone, as busy as we always are, we never have enough time. Our interactions do have to go beyond the ask. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Good. And I think it's really key that, you know, sometimes we get so caught up in the what I have to do and the 1, 2, 3 and the process that we forget that the foundation of all we're doing is about relationship.
Absolutely.
Whether it's relationship with the people we serve, the relationship with our teams, the relationship with our board members, the relationship with our funders, that runs through everything.
Absolutely.
And what I think you have to do too is that if you're not the person that's the warm, fuzzy relationship person, you need to find somebody on your team who is.
Or on your board, right? Like
right,
you
on
do.
your board, your team, and actually, yes. And let's talk about that a little bit because I always get a lot of questions about the board and what are they supposed to do and how can they help me? So let's talk about what is a board member supposed to do that will help fund the nonprofit that they're ambassadors for.
Absolutely. And it's such a good, one of the things that we were talking about is we know that some of you were here last year. And so Susan Hairston, who's a dear friend of both of ours,
yes,
spoke. And like one of the things she talked about was board responsibilities. And like technically at the end of the day, all boards of directors, if you're new and starting up your nonprofit, you probably have heard the advice of like, find your 3 or 4 or 5 people who you need to have on your board, right? Even at the very beginning, it's like, if you have a zero budget, you have a zero budget, but you must have board members and everything to bring it all together. But the duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, I mean, I present to my board every year about their responsibilities. And it's formal, it's very compliancy. So Susan talked about leadership and communications and finance and compliance, but the board responsibilities are really critical. I believe that many of us don't articulate often enough just the basic rules, which you can draw down from your state nonprofit. Each of you has a state nonprofit organization that generally has some good overview documents to like, hey, this is what you do. We use a resource, and we're going to drop some resources in here. And I have promised that I'm going to provide links to all of them as an after document for you all, but get your pens ready. Board Source. Board Source is the go-to organization that we refer to ensure that the fundamental things that any board, small or large, must do, that they're covered. Because I could say, hey, board, do this. It's very different when I bring a piece of paper, or so to speak, or I send something from another authority and say, this is what you need to do. So I'm a big fan of getting somebody else to be your mouthpiece, and Board Source is my mouthpiece. And that duty of care, they have to make sure that when they're making decisions about the organization they're stewarding responsibly, they have to have a duty of loyalty, which means that you can't, if you're on 5 different nonprofits, you got to make sure you keep all that separate and separate from your own business and your own kind of other conflicts. And then your duty of obedience is do what the CEO, executive, or director and staff tell you to. That's what I call the duty of obedience. But that piece right there, that's important. But the duty of care is where the fundraising comes in, Dr. Adu. I mean, in the sense of, you have to have somebody on your board who's really good, who's connected, networked, and can raise some money. We often tell people, find a lawyer to serve on your board. Find someone who's got an accounting or finance background. Find someone with some kind of marketing or communications background. So I choose boards by the skill set that the people have, not by who I know. I'm like, these are the skill sets that we as an organization are going to have. And I have to have somebody who's really got that personality that you were talking about, who's just going to work a crowd and come in and be chatting up everybody and knows everybody at the church and knows everybody at the bank, right? And so I do think it's important that we remind all board members that their first duty is to ensure that they stand side by side with staff and board in making sure the organization is financially sound. And I think there's so many amazing resources to, like the Association for Fundraising Professionals, AFP, which I was a member of back in the day, talk about different ways to just really engage your board and kind of train them up or skill them up. And many of you probably are serving on a board or some type of advisory council in your community, but there's little bitty tricks, right? There's things that we can do that will really help us kind of come into that fundraising space. But if your board doesn't know how to raise money, they shouldn't be on your board. If your board is not writing a check to your organization, if you haven't made that a requirement, and I know this might be a sticky one, they don't need to be on your board. Every 100% giving is one of the first criteria that most funders look for before they give you money, because they want to know whether your board, not you, right? Because I know a lot of us, when we first start in our organizations, we're often writing the checks. We're often writing down our own salaries and reducing it. If you were supposed to be being paid $60,000 and you're taking 30, you make sure that your accountants show that as an in-kind gift for $30,000 from you to your org. There's ways to capture that and make sure that it's really seen that, like, for the work I'm doing, this should be my salary. But while we get started and prioritize some other things, or I prioritize my staff, this is what we're doing. Make sure it's documented. But it's really, really important that they write the check. And that doesn't have to be like a certain amount of money. We call it a floor. My floor is that everybody give. And then I lean into them and say, you all know, I know how much you get paid, because everybody works at a nonprofit. Their salaries are public. So I'm like, please don't make me come for you. But you know, you can write a check for $1,000. And the corporate, let's go back to corporate, they have matching funds. So a lot of companies, even small companies, if you write a $50 check, they'll write a $25 check or a $50 check or a $100 check. And so you also want to always be encouraging on your website or however you use social media or bring people to your org. You have to encourage your board members in particular that when they write the check to go get that match, because it can really amplify. And if you think about it, you have enough of those. You have like 15 board members, 10 board members, each of them writes X check and gets a matching gift maybe, or gets one friend a challenge. Like, okay, Lisa, if I write a check, can you write a check too? Well, I'm doing 250. Can you do 250? Well, that's $500. Before you know it, you might have paid for your financial services for the year. I always say the board should contribute enough to pay for a good audit and good financial review, which is somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. But I have always created in any organization that I have either served on the board with or been a part of some milestones for the board. But raising money is a thing they have to do. They have to write their check, and they have to have some kind of network that they can dig into, friends or family or work related, that will help the work. Very important.
So while you're sharing and you're calling out these big numbers, I hear somebody saying, but I have a grassroots nonprofit.
Absolutely.
I have a small community-based nonprofit. There's only 3 of us. There's only 4 of us. How do we do that?
Okay.
I would say, how do we scale that back a little bit?
Absolutely.
How do we get started? How do we set up to get started? Because we always want to have vision for more.
Yes,
but we have to really start where we are.
Well, I've had the distinct pleasure of being a team of 2 and a team of 386,000. So I have worked at some of the biggest companies in the world and some of the smallest nonprofits. And so what I will say is this, I have been using this term a lot lately, but how do you eat an elephant? Okay, I'm waiting for the chat response. Lisa, you got it. I know you're not coming off mute because we have instructions, but one bite at a time, right? Yeah, thank you. That is what you should think about. As a small nonprofit, when I was in the Maryland Fuel Fund, 2 of us, right? The one thing we did know though, was that our mission, think about your mission. Your mission is the way to draw people to you, right? And I am a huge fan. I'm not we'll talk about Facebook and a couple things, hopefully later. LinkedIn is where it's at. LinkedIn is so critical because if there's 1 or 2 of you all working at a nonprofit, you better have a LinkedIn profile. If you don't, that's your assignment. You have 1 week to complete it and show it back to the staff so they can review it and give you their feedback. LinkedIn is a professional network service that is free up to certain features. That is such a beautiful place to start. And I do believe that it's really important for you to be, who you're working with in your community, right? Church was always a first stop. The community foundation was like a second stop for me, right? And just letting them know we're getting started. Here's what we're doing. But we aligned ourselves as a 2-person team with Maryland Nonprofits, who still exists. Maryland Nonprofits was our everything. They had a ton of free service, free trainings, all kinds of stuff. But when we sat in a room with 20 people for the training, what were we doing? Networking. And next thing you know, I see that Samantha, it's like, you live in Catonsville. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, wait a minute. Oh, okay. Well, we're just getting started and everything else. If you know anybody who might be interested in volunteering with us, the first thing that small staff does is start to begin to build your volunteer core. Peak grant making is really, and your volunteers include your board. Remember, you're not paying them. So never talk around your board. When you talk about volunteers, include your board because they can get sensitive. And so you start with just the 1 or 2 of you, start to build the board, right? Very purposefully. Doesn't have to be big immediately. And your first couple board members are now responsible for the other board members, but they should stay in alignment with your goals. Like, who are you trying to bring in? But get to your local state nonprofit. Huge, because now everything's virtual too and online because of the pandemic. And so resources that you couldn't access unless you got in the car and drove to it before are now all available. And I think that's it. Like when I sat in that room, now Samantha and I are meeting for coffee on Friday. And then we talk and she goes, oh, I think I know somebody. And so, and then she connects me on LinkedIn. I follow up. Now that is the one thing. We are busy, busy. There are not enough hours in the day, and time is a resource none of us have enough of. You must follow up when Samantha gives you the name, when Julius gives you the name, when Mark gives you the name, when Kathryn gives you the name. You have to follow up. You have to send that quick note, set up the next coffee and the next coffee. The one-to-one networking is critical when you are a small team and you're starting to build your board, because you don't want to be haphazard, but there's also no rush. If you're aiming for excellence, be good or be gone. That's what the Apollo says. So I would just say, slow down, start networking, start showing up at your local nonprofit, go to the webinar, the virtual webinar. Candid is a resource that I want all of you all to become extremely familiar with. Every nonprofit, no funder is going to Facebook or Instagram to find its grantees. We use GuideStar, and GuideStar is a huge composite of nonprofit resource. It's like every nonprofit that's registered with the IRS gets then pulled over into GuideStar. Well, GuideStar actually has the analytic tools for us to check you as a nonprofit to see if you're in good standing and if you filed at least 199D. Because any public document filed with any financial documents filed with the IRS are also pulled over in your file. Most of the times it's just your EIN and that. It's nothing. And so the second thing, if you're not already on LinkedIn, your second homework assignment is Candid. And to make sure that your nonprofit is signed up there, because what Candid does is they tag you. So if somebody's looking for you, let's say it's another nonprofit looking to partner, they find you that way too. They tag because you're doing homeless women, right? That's going to be a tag on there, unhoused, or diversity, equity, inclusion, or formerly incarcerated. Like there's these micro tags in there that allow people to find you. And so that is where networking begins. But then Candid offers a whole suite of services and resources for nonprofits. Again, you get in the room and now you got a new friend. And so I always think from the perspective, when we talk about reframing philanthropy, the average foundation has a staff of 20. Some of you on the line might be working in a staff that's larger than that, to be honest with you, or you have a company that's bigger than that. The average foundation is smaller than you realize. Average foundation's assets are about $10 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but they're only giving away 5% of that is all that they're required to give away. But, so I am always kind of not speaking to the large entity. I kind of always start with the small. I only have 11 staff members, and I say only, but for what we do, we know that we're part of the top 10% size-wise of nonprofits. But at the end of the day, we really do try to think about what does the small organization need to do. So you've got Candid, you've got your state nonprofit organization, and you have LinkedIn. Such great places to get started when you're small.
Awesome. So, and we're talking about kind of all these things that you're hitting on today. So, STC Consulting came about because after 20 something years, having founded a nonprofit, having worked at one, I think my first job out of college was a receptionist at a nonprofit, working at all levels at the church, teaching in schools. And I realized, gosh, I've got this long history of, helping people. And later on after law school, people would just come to me and say, hey, can you help me start my nonprofit? But I knew that being able to help people with formation is not enough. Right. And so you really have hit on, kind of the crux of how our business has moved into supporting nonprofits in their operations, where we can help you with business and strategic planning. We can help you with financial management. We can help you on the tech side. We can help you with executive coaching and with your boards and board development. So it's exciting for me to just, know that we're in the pocket and we're here, you know, to
Yes.
really continue to provide support, because that wasn't really the initial vision, but you know,
Mhm.
our desire has been to meet the needs of our communities.
Mhm.
So I love the resources. So I've put some homework assignments in there from her. They're in the chat.
Mhm.
And you really want to take advantage of these resources. And so listen, these resources don't cost you anything, except you have to have tech access. And
Mhm.
even with that, if you go to your local library, you can get in. There's some local libraries that can help you navigate some of these resources too, if it's just a little bit too much for you to figure out on your own. So
Absolutely.
I want to open up the chat now for questions. If you all will go ahead and put questions in, because she's sharing some meaty stuff, and I'm telling you, she and I can go. So we're going to keep talking, but you all start thinking about your questions, something she's saying, and go ahead and put it in the chat. So so Tanya, we talked about how now is a really critical time for nonprofit leaders to really understand what they need to say and what they need to do.
Mhm.
And so you're on the side of our industry, and we're all one family. You're
Mhm.
just a cousin. So,
Cousin
so
Satanya right here.
yeah, that's right. So our private foundation cousins have a very different view than
Mhm.
sometimes the public charity cousins who are on the ground doing the work.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the partnership and being able to connect with somebody with a different view is so helpful. But tell me a little bit about what you're seeing now in the philanthropy world, how that impacts the public charities,
Mhm.
and especially in light of COVID, because COVID
Mhm.
was a game changer for everybody, not
Mhm.
only in our industry, but in every industry. But the good thing is that it forced even our business to think differently
Mhm.
and be more creative and figure out other ways to be of help. So talk to us a little bit about what you see happening, some trends, or even some things that maybe are a little not quite where you'd like for them to be right now, but are things that
Mhm.
we could that would help us.
So let's start with we'll start with the positive for sure.
Okay. All right.
There were, I mean, our organization's 25 years old right now. And for at least the last 10 years, we've been talking about things such as check runs and being able to get money out to organizations electronically using EFTs or ACH, right? So you complete your banking information, you sign the piece of paper, you say you're the authorized person, and you give it to them. They do a quick check, and then the money pops into your account. So many foundations were resisting this. I mean, we couldn't understand if it was about jobs, because you have to be real honest,
Right.
even at
Right. Mhm.
I like to remind my community, which everyone that works the people connected to Peak are not the program officers. For those of you who know a bit about foundations, the program officer at a small foundation or a large foundation, they're the ones who make the relationships and can recommend the grant. Everyone else in grants management, or if they work in IT, they work in human resources or finance, they have a role to play, right? They're the administrators. They make up the rules. They make sure all the compliance requirements are done. So the people in my community are all on the operations side, right? Important, because we know how much money is in the bank. We know how much money we still have to give away, and we have great relationships with the program officers. One of the things I notice in working with even the people who I love, my peeps, they were rooted to their freaking routines, and I was like, whew. Check runs every other week make a nonprofit have to wait 2 weeks for money they needed like a year ago. Stop with the madness. But oh my gosh, what did we need? A global crisis? Well, you know what? Bring it. Global crisis. Crisis makes humans. My background psychology, you heard that. I am constantly intrigued by how people need their house to burn down before they go do something well. And I, for the last 20 years of my life, have said, thank you, God, for waking me up this feels like a good day. Let me change today. Because every psychologist and psychiatrist will tell you, if you seek to change during crisis, it will not stick. We have to get better at humans. And this is what I'm saying to foundations. So you're hearing it straight from me. Hey, foundations, you didn't need a global crisis to operate better. You didn't need a global crisis to actually leave your ivory tower and walk into community and go help with that really long line at the food bank. Like, you could have done that. And so now they were building relationships during a crisis, trying to call you all, while you all were trying to handle 1 million calls from the people you serve. Well, it's a bad darn time to be creating relationships. And so I think they got it. They got it, they got it, they got it. And I think they started to stop thinking about the 2 or 3 program people, and they started to think about us as a staff. How are we showing up? What are we doing? Do I even have a relationship with any of the grantees? I'm the CEO, we have millions of dollars. Do I even know the grantees other than signing the grant letter? No. So I do think that the relationship divide was really, really prevalent. And then I do believe that foundations really realized that the IRS requires 2 things before we make a grant. We must verify that you are real and that you are not out of compliance with the IRS. So I'm going to say real and in compliance, right? So this is what we call the green check mark on GuideStar. GuideStar has you as green, yellow, or red. If you are red, we cannot fund you. But what we have encouraged people to do, funders to do, is that if you do have an organization that there's a hit on GuideStar, when you go to check on them, that is not a no. That probably means that there's something going on. And this is your opportunity to build capacity, which I know is the theme of so much of what you do. And so that's what we're doing, is we're trying to also remind the funder that that's not a no, that's a stop and ask question moment. And so technically the IRS says, make sure they have a green check mark, which means they have a valid EIN and they are in good standing with the IRS. That's the first thing. The second thing is, the organization must be mission aligned. So if I save whales and I decide to write a check to a food pantry, the IRS is going to be like, what's up with that? And so that's the thing. It's like, that will get the foundation in trouble, not you. You can take the check, because in the moment, sometimes people do designate up to a certain amount of money that they're going to give away in emergencies that are not within mission. But technically, that's it. Green check mark, mission aligned. That's all the IRS requires of a funder. But if you've ever worked with a foundation, their list is sometimes pages long of what you must do to get their money. 20-page grant application, 5 reports, all this other stuff. The biggest trend is that I saw foundations getting rid of reporting requirements. I saw many foundations that only gave away program grants, which mean you have to do an application and it's for a thing. So maybe you do 3 things and they write a check for 1 of the things, as opposed to giving you a general operating support or capacity building grant. We saw a huge trend shift to just writing what we call the blank check, which means here's a check for X dollars. You can use it any way you need to. Lights on, staff, nothing. Put it in the bank. Whatever you need to do, you can do. So we saw the trend to going to electronic payments, huge and positive. Moving money fast, like not waiting every 2 weeks, right? Everybody's approved that this money should go here, and let's just get it done. It's gone in 30 minutes now, not 3 months. That was a huge trend shift. Relationship building and getting into community real honestly, right? And this move to the other big thing, which is really great, has been a move to more funders wanting to fund multi-year grants. Some of them multi-year general operating grants. Now that's really new. And we've tried to Peak has always tried to show, hey, here are all these funders that are doing it, and they report lots of great outcomes. We've been trying to get more people over to that general operating support and multi-year, but those are like big trends. So immediate money, more general operating support and capacity building grants, better relationships with their grantees, right? Making sure that they are kind of doing away with the burden of the application and the report for sure. Absolutely. Those are like things that are just kind of happening. So those are the positives. The part that's a little bit interesting is that it took a whole bunch of people watching a man die last summer for people to be like, oh, I should probably pay attention to equity. And I have been coming for all of those folks, because those folks don't all not look Black. They are Black too. They are leaders of all stripes, and people with resources of all stripes who just don't get it. They don't get it. And they also don't get that when we talk about, people talk about climate, that affects poor people, white and Black and yellow and green and indigenous. Environmental stuff impacts us the most because we're the ones that live in the neighborhoods that are closest to factories, and we're the ones with the iron paint in the building that we live in. And so we've really started to connect the dots, because if we just talk about Black and white, we're going to lose a lot of people. But if I really start to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how the social justice and environmental justice and the governance changes and the things that the UN kind of talks about really apply to the US. And we need to be thinking much more globally about change and sustainability as a planet, as a group of people connected to each other. That is starting to resonate. But I mean, it's what? It took you what? Like till you had to watch a video of somebody die before you thought, we should probably think about the police. So I'm tired of that, and I'm getting really frustrated with it. It's also where I'm trying to get more white people to talk to white people. The allyship that we talk about in this field is that I think a lot of Black leaders, it is leadership fatigue, it's nonprofit fatigue, because all of us are coming to work and we lost somebody 2 months ago, or we have a kid, our kids are literally like, don't you come in this door, I'm on camera today, don't you knock on that door, somebody else is taking care of you. We're all managing so much as human beings while trying to work and try to, in nonprofit, go help somebody else. It's a lot. And so we do need allyship and more Indigenous folks, Asian folks, white folks, different people than the Black leadership sometimes coming to the table with some solutions, but understanding what the problem is at its essence, right? Which is that this country is just built on a lot of bad stuff. And the wealth they have is built on the backs of us too. And so it's a conundrum. I don't want to vilify foundations, because I have been working in this space for 25 years and seen some beautiful things happen and real change. But I do think that this equity piece, Dr. Adu, is just, that one's a tough one for me. And it shouldn't be a new thing in the last 5 years for people since Trump was elected. I find that intriguing.
Yeah. And so, with this conversation, for those of you all that are listening, this conversation that we're having is kind of moving from your local work to expose you to what is kind of going on in the outer world that impacts your local work. So these are the things that are going on behind the scenes, the conversations, other things that you really don't even have access to, may not need to, but it is helpful to know, because these are the folks you have to develop these relationships with. And the more intel you have about the industry and the potential funders that you want to speak to, it really allows you to approach them from a position of strength and not a position of weakness, and with a mindset, because my mindset is that I'm not leaving till you write me a check. And I'm going to keep calling you until you or your friend writes me a check. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a part of what we do. We just approach it from a different vantage point. But our role is to advocate for the people we serve, because we know that many of the people that we're serving are just being impacted and don't know what to do. And they're looking to us for the help, for the support. And we don't have to have all the answers, but I cannot tell you how invaluable it is to have a network and be able to reach out to somebody to get some information, to get a resource, and to be able to hand it to somebody. So,
and if I could just add to that, and we talk about as a small staff and you don't quite have all the resources that you need, You do not want to spend your precious time asking, let's say, Procter and Gamble, you're in Cincinnati and Procter and Gamble's right there. You have to know what Procter and Gamble funds. What we see all the time is these like blanket letters that go out to lots of people like, we're amazing, fund us. Don't do that. I'm going to tell you, do not do that. Be a bit of a nerd about philanthropy. Be curious, to the point that's being made, be curious about who's funding what. And I'm telling you, one meeting with your local community foundation or regional association answers many things. But also GuideStar allows you to go find us. The funders are also on GuideStar and they'll tell you what they fund. So I would just say, if you have only 5 hours a week to really do your ask and get your letters or your emails ready to go send out to folks. And people are absolutely fine. I do want to point this out. Folks are much better with the informality now of getting an email request that has a link to your online thing. That is becoming much more, acceptable. And they may have a grant application when they're ready to fund you or something that they need you to complete. But I also think that it's just so important. Don't use your 5 hours of time asking people who don't fund your thing. And that is so common. And I just want to encourage everyone, you have to take a moment, jump on their website, find if it's a corporation, you want to go and find their CSR, corporate social responsibility. CSR is the code word or the initials you want to look for when you go on a company's website. And it'll tell you immediately whether they have one, because if you can't find it, then they're not really giving. They're probably just sponsoring a golf tournament here or the Girl Scouts here or something like that, very informally. But CSR, and it'll tell you, we fund homelessness, we fund addiction, we fund this. And the same thing for a foundation. Every foundation, most foundations that you'll be looking for have at least a website. It may not have a lot on it, and it may only be one page, but it will definitely tell you their mission and their focus areas for funding. Take time to do that because your time is so valuable. Don't use it asking. The persistence is huge. Don't let the persistence be for naught, which is, we don't even fund that. Like I want to help you, but we don't even fund that. And then they start to wonder if you did your research. Right. They start to wonder if you did your research. And I've been telling foundations that that's unfair. They have all the resources in the world to identify you. Right now, the game is we got to find them. And it just is what it is. So if that's what we have to do it with diligence. That is for sure.
Awesome. So you said CSR is corporate social responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. You
All
got
right.
it.
That's in the chat. So listen, we're down to our last 3 minutes. There's been no questions, and I understand why. Spellbinding, life-changing, just shift your whole mindset in a moment. But this is the power of connecting to people who know something different than you. Mm-hmm. Because you can spend 3 months trying to find somebody, get some information, and make one phone call, have your answer in 10 minutes and keep it rolling. Yep. So Satonya, I'm always inspired and geeked whenever we talk, but I would like you, just as we're preparing to close out and move into workshops and our morning breakouts, can you just, we talked about change being afoot, and I'd love for you to just share something inspirational that will just hold our attendees as they go forth from here to go back out into the community and do the work.
Well, I just think it's been such an interesting time to see so many more people truly embracing everyday philanthropy, like truly embracing everyday philanthropy, which is the 10 sisters at Spelman who put their money together and decide to get it back out by the end of the year. Like, we're all going to put whatever we can get into the pot, and then we're going to give it away to 10 organizations. We're seeing just so many kind of inspirational moments. It was a beautiful press release that went out on Monday from a foundation that probably a lot of people have never heard of. And they realized they had made quite a bit of money on their investments that in the bank during the pandemic. And so they asked their accountant to tell us, how much money did our investments make between March of last year and August of this year? It was $123 million. Most foundation, I know that these are huge dollars, and this is not a big foundation. They're just invested super, super well. And they do have money. They turned around and they asked the accountant to write the check. They moved the whole 123 million. They said, we're not keeping anything that we earned during this pandemic so far. They turned it around and did surprise grants to 71 nonprofits in the Phoenix area. And it was the trustees, a group of old white people who were the family and descendants and friends of Virginia G. And they didn't tell anyone. They didn't tell their president. They didn't tell anyone. So this was really a group of people who just said, we can't take the money with us. And that right there, I've been in conversation with that organization for years about change. But to see something like that happen and watch the tears, right, as people got the call to come in and they were like, why, it's a pandemic. And then they handed them a check. It was beautiful. So I am seeing so much inspiration. And really, I have a much longer list of notes from talking to you, Kathryn, than you have from talking to me. Oh. And so what I will say is that I think the innovation and ideas that are coming out of community and nonprofit leaders is keeping me so super inspired, because I know I've got my list as a nonprofit of all the things I want to do. And I'm seeing foundations actually finally shift. And so this is just a moment. The change that's afoot is truly seeing ourselves as being a connected fabric. And I think there's a lot of stuff that's not going right, but I see so much that's just happening in front of my eyes, walking through my own neighborhood, which doesn't mostly look like me, and seeing people wave and say hi and take a moment. It's just, there's something shifting. And even as people dig their heels in on their hatred, on the other side, and hey, every day somebody disappears and another baby's born, and we have to hope for the future. We just do, because if we're not doing it and we're not living it and then activating on it in our little ways and in our big ways, I'm not sure who else we're waiting to do it. So I just encourage you all to go big or go home, right? And all that passion and all that mission you have must be coupled with all of this business. Compliance is boring, is required, because we need you here. And so that's what I will end on. And just thank you all for the invitation to join you. Thank you so much.